Okay, so good morning or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you're joining us from. We are here for this webinar that at Insights, that's me, Belén Gallego from at Insights, collaborating with the MESIA, the Middle East Solar Industries Association. And we're organizing this webinar, getting a little bit into the round 2 of Egypt's feed-in tariff scheme. What are the lessons learned from the the last tenders, and what are we expecting in the next ones to come? And we have here with us a really great panel of experts that hopefully are going to tell us a little bit of the inside track into what the market looks like, what's the promises, what are the opportunities. So let me go one by one, introducing, and guys, we haven't really trained this. I didn't really tell you I would be doing this, but since we're all joining from very different places, and this is a very international webinar, I think I'd like to ask you if you can unmute your microphone really shortly, and just as I call your name, if you could just tell us where you're joining us, say hi, you know, where you're joining us from, so also our audience knows exactly who you are. So Engineer Lamia, you know, from EETC, could you please tell us where are you based?
I'm based in Cairo, Egypt.
So you're joining us from Cairo, excellent. Okay, the next person, Christopher from the IFC, where are you joining us from?
Hi, Belén, I'm in Dubai.
Excellent, okay, so as you can see, we're everywhere. I'm in Madrid, by the way, I didn't say it, but I'm based in Madrid. Next person, Mohammed from Aqua. Where are you joining us from? Mohammed, we can't hear you. I think maybe you haven't switched on your microphone.
You hear me now? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm joining from Morocco.
From Morocco, excellent. Okay, and Morten, where are you joining us from?
Hi, Belén. I'm calling in from Paris right now.
From Paris, excellent. Okay, so we're actually missing Sheriff at the moment because he was caught between meetings in Shanghai. I think a last-minute trip. He might join later, but no, at the moment he's not on the list, even though he was supposed to be one of the speakers. So as you can see, this is very international. Guys, you guys in the audience, please feel free to also share where you're joining from. And just to let you know a little bit of how we're going to do this today, you're going to hear from all of our speakers. Very fast presentation. First, we're going to hear from, in the same order that you've heard them from now, a little bit of presentation from Lamia and from Morten. We'll have some just words from Christopher and from Mohammed, and then we'll move on to the questions. And this is what I wanted to get into, because I would like you to guys send your questions by the Q&A box, which is at the bottom, okay? Just send me your questions. I'm going to be monitoring them, and I'm going to be asking them live, or as many as we can, I'll ask them live. Panelists, feel free to, you know, ask questions as well if you want to answer each other's, you know, as someone finishes, you know, jumping in, you know, let's make this into a fluid conversation. And just one more thing before we continue. We are recording this panel, okay? We will send you the recordings after the panel is finished, okay? In a couple of days you will receive it. And also we have the presentations, the PowerPoints from Engineer Lamia and from Morten, and we will be PDFing this and also putting them up online, so you will be able to access them. You will always ask me, so yes, you will have access to the materials. But before we actually start with the questions and answers, let's hear first of all, please, Engineer Lamia, could you start us out? So what we'd like you to do is just share your screen first of all, and then you can start talking.
Do you see the presentation?
We can't see yet, so all you have to do is just press share screen. So just remember, guys, whilst Engineer Lamia is putting up her presentation, to send me the questions and answers so that we can ask them. This is a very good opportunity because we have made this panel so that it's not got very long presentations. It's mainly about the value of being able to answer the questions. Can I help you?
Yes, please.
Okay, so all you have to do is go to the green button at the bottom where it says share screen, press on it, and then select the document that you want to share. Perfect. Yay. Could you put that in large screen, please? At the bottom, you've got like a large screen. We can still see the slides on the side. So if you press the large screen button so that it becomes larger. In any case, we could probably, yay, perfect, well done. Okay, we're ready. We're ready for you, Engineer Landia. Go ahead.
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. I am glad to share this webinar with you all. I hope it gets to the satisfaction of all of you. I will start off that our strategy that was announced that to reach 20% of the total generation from your renewable energy by the year 2022. Of course, this means a big investment as it's around 8 giga from renewables. This big investment cannot be taken by the government only. So we, in this way, we needed our partners, the private sector, to do this this job in partnership with the Egyptian government. We started the idea of the private sector in renewable energy in the year 2009, where we announced our first BAO wind project, who are also achieving financial closure in December, same as Feed-in Tariff Solar in Bombay. The first FIT program was announced in the year 2014. The dead end was to submit the PQs in November 2014. We received an enormous number of applications, 187 proposals. For round one, three projects only achieved financial closure, but after this, one of the three couldn't complete the project, and they withdrew. So the ones are on site now are two projects only from round one. For round two, 32 projects or consortiums has submitted the financial closure documents. This is under investigation by EETC team and our consultants, and we expect to finalize this evaluation before the end of the year. Before this strategy was announced, the only renewable we had was a small amount of wind energy. That was for the total generation. We didn't see it a big problem as it was a small integration in our network. But since we had announced this strategy, EETC was faced with this amount of renewable energy. What has EETC done? At first, we have to do the evacuation studies, which is done by our network planning department. This is include the static load flow and the short circuit analysis, and this is also after the selection of the plot of the plot that will be the project will be implemented on, and this plot is chosen binary for every project. After that, we had to prepare the codes. We have the transmission grid code in place. After this, we established a wind grid code. This was done by our consultant, the German Fichtner Freehills. Then after that, we developed the solar code by EETC with the assistance of Mercados, the Spanish consultant. In these codes, we are defining the technical requirements for the point of common coupling. That means that each developer has to fulfill some technical requirements, including harmonics, including short circuit levels, many things to be allowed to be connected to the grid. Round 1 was not as successful as round 2 because the lenders, the big lenders like IFC or EBRD and all these big names, has pushed back. Why did this happen? Because the Egyptian government has stated that the arbitration will be the venue and seat in Cairo, following the PRICA rules. The lenders didn't have problem with the venue in Cairo, but the problem was the seat. So this was changed in the documents in round 2. After this, we worked as a team together with the developer and the lenders to put the documents and solve these minor issues that stopped round 1. We had, of course, many lessons learned dealing with the investors and being 4/7/11 ready to answer their questions. Of course, this was a learning process between ETC and the developers. We had many diplomatic skills because we are always devil's advocate. When dealing with the developers, we represent the government. When dealing with the government, we represent the developers. So we developed our diplomatic skills to go on with this type of communication. Also, of course, we gained much experience with the big lenders like World Bank, EBRD, and DIB, and others. Also, our partners in the renewable projects, Naria, Egyptera, in preparing the required agreement and the regulation necessary for these big projects. Also, our governmental entities, MOIC and MOF, we worked as a team to solve all interfacing issues between electricity sector and other entities. Also, as special experience in the trade, as we call it, already ETC are now have a good team of experts in preparing tender documents, in evaluation the documents, putting all the documents in a good shape to be bankable to lenders. Of course, a good time management to deal with all developers and answer the questions, and also be available at this webinar as it was amidst of many meetings and many work commitments. That's an example, of course. Also, I think it was the first time in the world to do the cost-sharing agreements on behalf of the developers to build the required substations connected to connect these projects to the grid, and making the road works and so on. Also, I think our friends, the developers in Bilbao, was the partners with us in managing this cost-sharing agreement. Finally, we had a dream of building the largest solar plant in the world, and we are now bringing it into reality thanks to everybody who shared with us this experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Engineer Lamia. I'm sorry I had to take my camera off because I've had some technical difficulties with the internet, but could you stop sharing your screen, please, Engineer Lamia? And we will actually go to the next speaker, and then we'll take the questions after. I've seen that you've already sent a few questions. I'm making a note of them. Christopher, can we hear from you, point of view of the IFC, which is, one of the lenders there? How's the situation, your thoughts, essentially?
Absolutely. Thanks, Belen. Thank you, Engineer Lamia. Great to have everybody here today. Well, listen, I haven't prepared a slide presentation, but I think that I could be able to talk to most of the points. When Egypt came out with this proposal back in 2014, it was both quite an exciting time for us at IFC to be able to collaborate with the government to try to bring this to fruition. But we were also quite aware of the challenges. I mean, this particular initiative, Egypt could have easily taken the 2,500 megawatts as it was looking at those times in solar and made 2 or 3 big giant projects and tendered them. But instead they decided to create huge number of investment opportunities, up to 70 individual sites, big enough to be substantial, but small enough for them to be able to attract foreign and local investors of large and small sizes. It really created a market, and that was quite exciting to us, and we wanted to support that. We engaged early on, and obviously we had a lot of conversations, a lot of long time negotiations trying to get the project documents bankable, and eventually in round 2 they were. But what was important was to come up with an idea of just how we could cope with so many individual sponsors at the same time and finance them. It's usually a lender's nightmare. You have all the work that goes into financing just one project, whether it's a tiny little 10 megawatt project or a 800 megawatt project, it's the same amount of work. So for us, we needed to come up with an idea of how we would be able to process in large quantities multiple projects. Luckily, just a year before Egypt announced their projects, we had been doing a similar idea, but on a much smaller scale in Jordan. We called our program the Seven Sisters Program. We financed 7 projects in parallel. Well, Egypt was doing 55 projects in parallel. So we had to ramp up and really get our heads together on how to do this. But luckily we had that template to work with, and we grabbed it and replicated it and brought it into Egypt. We built up our team. We got advisors on board. But what was really important is that everybody that signed up with IFC to do what we now call the Nubian Sons, our program, that they all bought into the idea that they'd have to give up a lot of individual negotiation rights and be able to come into a standardized program where we produced a standardized set of financing documents across the board and ran all of our sponsors in parallel. And that took a leap of faith on their part. It took a lot of trust to be able to come to the IFC and trust us not to ramrod entirely lender-friendly documentation down their throats. And on our part, we made a commitment to them to be fair, firm, but fair. And so we were quite pleased that we were able to support 18 sponsors who grouped together into 6 sponsor groups. Luckily, we didn't have to deal with 18 individually, but actually they were collectively working together. So we had basically 6 separate sponsor groups that were developing 13 different projects. And all of them bought into this idea that we were working together collectively and that we would have a single point of reference. So that was the big feature. We had one common law firm, well, 2 law firms, one local counsel, one international counsel, Norton Rose and Shakari Shahan, and then a common technical advisor and a common insurance advisor working with us all on the same plane, so that whatever one sponsor got, everybody else got, and vice versa. Alternatively, the other challenge was how are we going to syndicate this, and who are we going to syndicate it to? Because what we wanted to do and achieve was to get lenders to come back to Egypt in a big way. We didn't want to just bring 1 bank or 2 banks and partner with us, but we wanted to bring as many banks as possible to give them exposure to the Egyptian power market. so that when the next deal and the deal after that comes out, we actually have quite a large base of liquidity to work with. In this regard, we took the same approach. We went out broadly across the globe and made partnerships with people who could believe in the program and wanted to come in and look at the syndication, not just of one project or two projects, but of a group of projects. Now, it was impossible to bring in a lot onto every single project. So certain lenders, such as the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, bought in and came into every project with us. There were two that came in at the end, two extra projects at the end that they didn't join in because it was a little bit late for the credit process, but they came into 11 projects out of the 13 that we did. Others like CDC and Arab Bank out of Jordan and Europe Arab Bank, their sister out of London, each came into 9 projects. But we had 11 financing institutions in total, counting the IFC, of course, but that finance projects in Egypt. And together with the other projects were financed by EBRD and Proparco, the total number of lenders was 16, last my count. I might have missed a couple, but there's at least 16 lenders coming into Egypt. So it's a huge accomplishment. And we're quite pleased and quite proud of what we were able to do. Our portfolio of 16 projects were composed, actually totaled 752 megawatts, which was on a peak basis, 590 on an AC basis, contracted basis, which represented about 40% of Egypt's round 2. So that was a nice thing about it. Anyway, I mean, those are the general big picture stuff that went with it. We were quite pleased, quite happy that we were able to run this. We now have standardized documentation that we can pull out at any time and reuse, you know, for subsequent rounds or for the BOO projects coming up, and in a good position to be able to help clients on a very low-cost basis by not having to reinvent the wheel every time. Sorry, that was another important thing about the program, is that by pooling all this in a common standardized way, our sponsors shared the costs, which normally, you know, just legal costs alone to do one project can easily be a couple $1 million. But, you know, in their case, they pooled, you know, taking legal costs, dividing them by 13, became affordable and made it quite attractive for them. Belen, I'll turn it back over to you now, and I'm open for questions later on.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Christopher. Okay, let's go with Mohammed. Let's hear from you, Mohammed, from Aqua, the developer's perspective, or one of the developer's perspective. And then we'll take it from there. You need to unmute yourself, Mohammed. We can't hear you at the moment. Sorry.
Can you hear me now? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so thank you, Belen. Thank you to all the attendees. Thank you, Engineer Lamia, for giving your insight from an off-taker perspective, and to Christopher from one of the lenders' perspective. Now, from the developer's perspective, and from an Aqua Power perspective also, Egypt has been a tremendous, fast-growing market on all fronts, and especially on the renewable side, as Engineer Lamia highlighted. So there is a program to reach 20% of installed capacity from renewables by 2022. And not only this is an optimistic and an opportunity for the developers such as Aqua Power, but it's interesting that Egypt has one of the most diversified legal frameworks for the power generation. So Egypt allows for tenders, allows for feed-in tariff, allows for offtake directly to end customers. Egypt has been a very interesting market. It has seen some difficulties in the past, which are understandable, but I think Egypt in the past year or two has been growing very fast following economic reforms, and even its international rating has been improving. So from the developer side, we see Egypt as a very important market that is going to be very fast flourishing. Now, coming to the feed-in tariff round 2, we have been a part of this program since the beginning, when it was announced in 2014. So this is a total of 1.8 gigawatts of PV plants. This would be the biggest solar park in the world once it's constructed. It is also one of the most diversified parks from a developer's pool and also from a lender's pool. So there's a lot of synergies and a lot of things going on. And so far, all the governmental entities, and especially EETC, have been putting a lot of effort in making this possible. It has not been easy, but it has been possible. And from our side, we have been successful in securing 3 projects. So all the projects range between either 20 megawatt or 50 megawatt individual plots. We have been also able to attract international financial institutions coming from Europe, coming from China, and this proves again that all the world is committed to accompany Egypt in their programs. For the feed-in tariff stages so far, as Engineer Lamia highlighted before, so 32 developers in round 2 have submitted their financial closure letters. So expecting EETC to confirm by end of the year acceptance of such financial closure so that construction can start. I think in 2018 we would be seeing most, if not all, of these projects delivering energy to the grid. Audience should also know that renewable energy in general, and the PV in particular, is a very, it's a technology that creates a lot of jobs, and we expect jobs to be created locally in hundreds. From our side as Aqua Power, we try to push for as much localization as possible. The technology is fairly simple, so that should be also possible for all the developers to be implemented. And going forward, so Egypt is tendering new projects in PV, in wind. The regulatory framework and the grid codes are being adapted to that end, and we continue to support Egypt in all their endeavors, and we hope that we would be able to meet their expectations.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. And the last person, Morten, if I can ask you to share your screen, please. And unmute yourself as well. Perfect. Just have to press share screen. Perfect.
Thank you, Belen. Can you see my screen now? Hello, Belen, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, good. First of all, thank you everyone for joining, and in particular thanks to Engineer Lamia and Christopher and Mohammed for the presentation so far. I think and those were very wise words spoken by all of you, in particular Christopher. You said at one point that we had every reason to be pleased and proud of what has been achieved, and I very much concur. I think this has been a massive effort from all sides, and it goes to show how, as you said, Engineer Lamia, working with the private sector and putting in place a framework and legislation on the government side, where the government acts across institutions and departments to facilitate private sector coming in, with the country having a vision to achieve something is where you can play the private sector best, to put it that way. So I think we have achieved something great, and now we all have to start construction. So we're eagerly awaiting that, of course. Now, I have a couple of slides. I want to take us back and reflect a little bit on the program per se. As Engineer Lamia was saying, this is going to be the world's largest solar PV park, and this is basically, I think, putting Egypt on the map in the solar PV world, to an incredible extent, where it's really putting in place a market, as you said, Christopher, and going from really not really having a utility scale solar PV sector to having a fantastic foundation for continuing to grow, I think, rapidly, a very competitive PV sector in Egypt, and contributing with clean energy to a country which is growing incredibly fast at more than 100 million and requires clean energy to drive growth and continue its growth pattern. These are just some numbers. They're unofficial, so Engineer Lamy, you'll have to excuse me. You'll have to confirm at the end of the day the total installed capacity, number of power plants, and FDI, etc. But these are approximate numbers, and I think they go to show the sheer scale of the undertaking in many ways. This is going to be more than 5,000 football fields covered with panels in the desert in the southern part of Egypt, close to Aswan, avoiding more than 2 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions every year. So contributing massively to the goals for Egypt under the Paris Agreement, and foreign direct investment flowing into the country of more than $3 billion, creating obviously significant economic activity both in the country, but also, as Mohammed was saying, locally. And I think all of the developers, we share the vision to have a significant and local content and maximize that to the extent possible. And we're all working together together with the Egyptian government under the facility management vehicle to make that happen in the right way. Now, if we move on a little bit, Scatec Solar, we have been active in Egypt since 2014. We're a listed company on the stock exchange in Oslo, Norway, where we are headquartered. And we were there from the beginning, as you said, Mohammed, Aqua was as well. And we have been following this program because we fundamentally very strongly believe in the fundamental opportunity space for solar PV in Egypt. And we believe that from the get-go in this program, it had its bumps in the road. I think that's fair to say, but we are now at the point where you will basically be building the largest solar PV plant in total installed capacity in the world. We, as Scatec Solar, are partnering on a total of 6 projects under the round 2. So we're the largest developer under the program. We're the largest investor under the program. And it reflects our position in Africa, I think. We're the largest operator of solar PV plants in Africa, and now the largest solar investor in Egypt. We are a company that developed, build, own, and operate our solar PV plants for the life cycle of the plants that we build, which means that we have an inherent long-term view and a long-term vision when we go into a country. So we're not there to build and sell as a fund player, but we're there to own and operate and invest in the communities where we invest, and make sure that these plants function as well as they can for their life cycle. That means that sustainability for us is not really a buzzword; it's an inherent part of our business model, and it's very important for us, I think, together with all the other developers, to make sure that we operate these plants in Benban in the right way, in compliance obviously with the standards, but also in adherence with the values we have, and with the vision together with the government to create local value. In Benban, we are investing together with the majority the Norwegian Fund for Emerging Markets, an equity fund from the Norwegian government. So we're partnering up with the government of Norway, and then together with Africa 50, which is the infrastructure fund for Africa, owned by 27 African countries, including Egypt, where Egypt is one of the major shareholders. So we're going into Egypt, I think, with a strong partnership vision, and it's to start something which I think is going to be a lot bigger, and we are very much looking forward to contributing to further developing this sector in Egypt going forward. Thank you.
Okay, I like your conclusions. It was really fast, and thank you very much for your point of view. Okay, so we open up a round of questions, and you guys have sent a lot of questions. We've got about just over 10 minutes to answer them. I encourage all of our panelists to, interact, talk about, exchange your opinions. Within possibility, try to be succinct so that we don't go on about, the same things. And let's start with the question that has been repeated many, many times. I'm trying, because there are so many questions, and like making, putting similar questions together. And one of the questions that has come up at least 3 or 4 times is the question of CSP. It's been mentioned, whether, this new round of 600, or the question actually said 700, but I think it's 600 megawatts that is now being tendered, whether it's going to be in the room, whether, it makes sense for Egypt to move into a CSP direction since the resource is so good and the prices have been reviewed down quite a lot. So, what's going to happen with CSP? Is there a room for CSP in the near future? Can some of the projects turn into CSP? I don't know who wants to take the lead on that question. Perhaps Engineer Lamia. I suppose everyone's going to be wanting to hear from you. And then, Chris and others can add on top of that.
Belen, I think we might have lost Engineer Lamia. I don't see her on the list anymore.
Oh, correct. Yes. Okay, Chris. Well, your turn then, until we get her back.
Well, as IFC, we're technology agnostic if the economics and the feasibility get up. So definitely CSP has certain advantages from our understanding. It has storage if you add in molten salt technologies, or perhaps others that have come along since then. I don't know, but molten salt is the main one. Hence, there is value to possibly incremental cost of CSP being able to replicate baseload, particularly in a country like Egypt that has much more demand at night than it does during the day, unlike the rest of the Arab world that lives on air conditioners during the day. So there is value to that, but a lot will be dependent on how cheap and competitive the various developers and EPC contractors can make that technology available. Back to you, Belen.
Yeah, I suppose I'm just taking my camera off to make sure that I don't go AWOX, since that today the internet does not want to help the solar gods. So I'm just worried, at the moment, considering how low, this, I don't know, maybe someone wants to talk about what's happening with these 600 megawatts. We were having a really interesting conversation, Mohammed, with you earlier about how this new round is different from the last round. Let's start from that. Can you comment a little bit about how this is different, and then we take it from there? I need to see you. Oh, God. Can you put this? We can hear him.
No?
Now we can. Sorry.
Okay. I think you are controlling my microphone. But anyway, so I believe the question was how about going from round 1 to round 2, correct?
Yes, correct. Yes.
Yeah. So basically, from a developer's perspective, and this has been explained by Engineer Lamia before, the risk allocation with respect of the project, especially from a legal perspective, did not allow most of the developers to, and also especially the lenders, to accept that risk profile. The international arbitration was a major point in the power purchase agreement, and this is something that is very critical to international developers and international financial institutions. Obviously, local developers and other financial institutions went ahead. 3 of them went ahead in the round 1, but this was a critical point which we could not, as Aqua Power and also our respective financiers, could not go ahead with. Eventually, it was resolved in round 2, and yeah. So I think this is the main feature that prevented most developers to submit their financial closure in round 1. Also, another feature is that the tariff was slashed by almost half, which is understandable in view of the rapid technological advance and reduction in solar PV industry. It's still a good price for us developers, and we see that it's a sustainable tariff. It's a feed-in tariff, so obviously the tariff is fixed by the off-taker. And I think going forward, it will be more interesting to see more competitive bidding, because that puts everyone on a par and allows for achieving better results. And yeah, so this would be most of what I have to say about that.
That's a good point, and it was going to be my next question. There's been a couple of questions here also in the chat about why FIT, why feed-in tariff, why not try with different structures. It has become now quite the rule, really, to move towards auctions, competitive biddings. So why are we sticking to this particular structure? I know that we've lost Lamia at the moment, but I don't know, who wants to take this question? Maybe, like, you know.
Hello?
Martin, go.
Okay, and then sure, I'll go first on Belen, and then Christopher, I'm sure also have perspectives on this. I think from our perspective as a developer, the feed-in tariff, let's say, concept is something that has a special role to play. We've seen this now in Egypt, and we've seen it before in other countries, including South Africa, where the feed-in tariff serves to provide enough visibility for a developer to go in when there's basically no solar PV market established. So it serves to establish a foundation, so to speak, upon which you can build. It serves to de-risk projects for the next phase, where risk is perceived quite high, when there is no solar PV market in place. And so that's why you would use a feed-in tariff program with a fixed tariff from the off-taker at the same moment, to give us sufficient visibility for developers to invest despite the risks, and then get the critical mass that de-risks a project and takes down financing costs for the next rounds. And I think you will see in Egypt, as we have seen in other markets, including in South Africa, that when people see construction going and the feed-in tariff program getting, let's say, firmly established, that it will contribute to take down the cost of solar PV in Egypt quite a lot.
Okay, Christopher?
Yeah, thanks, Belen, and very good answer, Morten. But just to add maybe a little bit more to that is that what we're seeing is that in countries, certainly in the first rounds today, and I'm not talking about in the past in Europe or not, but they see the feed-in tariff as a way to encourage multiple projects at the same time. Running tenders for a country is extremely time-consuming and project-intensive when you have to consider that in a typical tendered environment, the country will choose the site, they'll prepare the background information for it, and they'll have done quite a lot of work on the site in order for competitive bidding to be meaningful, so that a lot of the uncertainty is taken out of it. When you have a feed-in tariff or a direct proposal regime, as you see in Jordan and Egypt, particularly in the first round, you do encourage large number of alternative proposals to be brought forward at the same time. Or you also create, as I said earlier in my first presentation, you create a market. In this case, in round one, there were 55 projects going at one time. In round two, that fell down to 30, but you had 30 large projects get off the ground quickly. To tender each one of them individually, we would still be on the first couple of them probably right now, and you know, it would take quite a long time. Having a feed-in tariff regime that has a fair price, and you know, I think both prices in round one and round two were fair for the time periods that they were launched. You have you eliminate that uncertainty, as Morten said, and you encourage people to come in with a clear line of a vision of where they can get to and what the return can be, and making it worthwhile. In Jordan, and what we're going to see now in Egypt as well, this has paid dividends. The first round had a price, it proved the market. You had 12 projects in Jordan. You have now in Egypt 32 plus 2 from round 1, so 34 projects. And then with that established, subsequent rounds can be tendered. Jordan was very successful. Their second round was a reverse auction. Their third round coming up will probably be the same, where they take the first past the post. So the first 4 or 6 or 10 or 30 projects in these multiple project schemes will get paid the tariff that they bid, but only those projects that only those bidders who come in under the gate will get in. So it's quite effective, and it builds up the industry quite quickly. And I think that's the key point.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mohammed, do you wish to weigh in on this one? Because I have plenty of other questions. Let me yeah, go on.
Yeah, no, I think Christopher highlighted most of the main features of both regimes. I think feed-in tariff has also been the starting point for Europe and for many regions in the world, where you first establish a kind of first contact with the technology, and especially this is the first significant utility scale solar PV park in Egypt. So it makes sense in the starter to have a feed-in tariff. It's more simple for the off-taker and for the government. Then obviously going forward, I also agree with Christopher that we need to. I mean, the government is ready and has accumulated the experience and the know-how, and they can they can start tendering projects, and that would also have the effect of having the most competitive direct tariff for delivery of electricity. This is the same structure that we have been, as a developer, seeing in this region in particular, in UAE, in Morocco, in Saudi also, and we see Egypt going in that direction as well. Cost of energy keeps going down. It's being more competitive on the renewable side, either be it PV, wind, or CSP. CSP is also interesting because it's a good baseload alternative, and it can be achieved with the solar resource that Egypt enjoys. So I think we're going to see interesting developments in the years to come in the renewable field for Egypt.
Okay, so let's go into a fighting round because we don't have a lot of time. So how have the currency risks, convertibility and repatriation been addressed in round 2 projects to make them bankable? We know this was an issue in past rounds, so who wants to weigh in and perhaps answer as much as it can be answered? Mohammed, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So basically, maybe just for the audience to understand that the tariff, while expressed in US dollars, most of it is pegged to the exchange rate, and around 30% of it is I would say is floating and following the fluctuation of the local currency. Obviously, in October 2016, so the EGP, Egypt's currency, started floating in the markets, which actually brought more uncertainty as to the valuation of the currency, and therefore to a great portion of the revenues of the project companies. But we have seen that this has been stabilized in the course of this year around a certain figure. We have done macroeconomic studies and assumptions, and we believe that the risk, the currency risk, and the repatriation risk are manageable. There's also the new investment law that was published in September of this year, that also brought more comfort into and more freedom to the investors who are investing in this specific kind of projects. So from a developer's perspective, and I believe this also would be also from a lender's perspective, this although it's not perfect, we would be assuming like 100% dollarization of the tariff, but this is something that we as developers are able to take and hopefully that the economy will keep on growing in the pace that it has been. Yeah.
Inshallah. Excellent. Okay, next question. I'm going to move along so that we'll get an answer. If you guys want to weigh in, let me know, okay? This, I think, one is for you, Morten. What is happening with the new transmission line to be implemented for the evacuation of the Bemban site? Has it been developed on international standards? And what is the timeline for development? Do you happen to know any of this? Unfortunately, Engineer Lamia is not on the line, so I can't ask her directly. Do you have any knowledge in regards to this? Morten?
I couldn't catch the question, Belen, if you can repeat.
Sorry. So it says, what's happening with the transmission line for the evacuation of the Vembam site? If there is a timeline for that.
No, I think that would be an appropriate question for EETC to answer.
So you don't actually happen to know. Okay, no problem. Let's move it along. There was another one. Question for developers. What is your evaluation of the grid stability in the Vemban region in particular? So this is, okay, it's a follow-on. I know Engineer Lamia is not here, but this is for you guys, for you and for Mohammed. Any PV development in the grid is always an area of concern for developers and lenders. And I was wondering how the developers such as Aqua and Scatec approached this aspect. Morten, did you want to lead the answers?
Yeah, I'm sorry, the line's a little bit bad, so I'm capturing half of what you're saying. I apologize.
Okay, so it's just talking about what is your evaluation of the grid stability in the Vemban region. Apparently, this is an area of concern for developers, and this person who asked the question was wondering how developers such as Aqua and Scatec approach this aspect.
Okay, so regarding let's say infrastructure works for the Benban site, that is governed under the cost sharing agreement, and that the engineer Lamia was speaking to in her presentation. So it's actually a scheme where then developers are financing the infrastructure under the cost sharing agreement, and it's the government then putting it up. And I think that's a scheme that has been that is very important for the success of this project. Just as it is important that the developers work together through the facility management mechanism to make sure that both construction operation, particularly construction of this site, is going relatively seamlessly, given the amount of let's say the amount of activity on site. I mean, you will have more than 10,000 workers on site at peak, more than 200 containers and 300 buses arriving daily. So these are things that we are working together on.
Excellent, thank you, Morten. So now one for Christopher, I think. Why the discrepancy in the PPA required insurances between the 12-month and the 18-month indemnity period of the operational and construction period insurances? I don't know whether it's for you, Christopher. I just assumed because you're on the financial side.
Hi, well, yeah, I mean, that's a very technical question. And I think probably left for a direct one-on-one response. I'm gonna pass on that one.
No problem. If anyone wants to take it, and if not, we'll just Nolan J. That is the name of the person that asked. Maybe get in touch with the speakers directly. And one more thing this is for the three of you. Do the current contract frameworks provide for Egyptization or localization? Seems we had a few questions also about the whole of the localization side of things.
I think that there isn't any really specific requirement in the qualification to localize. Nonetheless, it is the best interest for the developers to localize as much as possible and minimize the foreign content. As I said earlier, PV is a fairly simple technology. It's modular in its installation and also in its operation. And for so far, we're probably going to be starting construction in beginning of next year. And I think that we have already we see that more than 50% of the project would be, and it's possible for it to be localized. So I think that it's something that most of the developers try to improve, and we'll see how it's going to be applicable during construction.
Okay, so we have about a couple of minutes. So do you guys want to do some last? There's only the three of you now online. Unfortunately, Engineer Lamia couldn't get back. So last thoughts, literally 20 seconds, and then we'll say goodbye to our wonderful audience. Do you want to start, Christopher?
Well, sure, absolutely. So anyway, it's only these last thoughts that make the difference. But basically, we're quite thrilled to have been part of this monumental, colossal project known as Egypt Fit Round 2. I think it wasn't pointed out during the conversation just how big the Benban site is. It will be approximately 2,400 megawatts on a peak basis, 1,800 megawatts on an AC basis. It's something like 37 square kilometers in size. And it's really quite an impressive accomplishment, and something really worthy of a country like Egypt, which has one of the longest histories in the world. So it's a great way for them to come into the market, and we're very happy to have been a part of that.
Okay, who wants to take it next? Mohammed, since your microphone's on already?
Yeah, well, I mean, thanks for everyone for this webinar. It was really interesting to share the opinions of off-taker, lender, developer. I think that Egypt is going at a really good pace, and is for as long as they make their vision happen. Developers like Aqua Power and obviously Scatec Solar and other will continue supporting Egypt in the various technologies. As I said in my introduction, Egypt is a very interesting country and has all the frameworks required. I think the main difficulty is the grade of investment of the country and the politico-economic implications of that. But I think that it's going in the right direction, and hopefully we'll see more breakthrough projects like this one happening in Egypt.
Excellent. And last but not least, Morten, your opinion or your final.
Thank you. I think I can just add my voice to what has been said by Christopher and Mohammed here. I think it's a very, very strong achievement, and we're very much looking forward to starting construction and realizing what will be the world's largest solar PV park. As Christopher said, it's a massive area. It's covering more than 5,000 football fields, so I'm sure you can see it on Google Earth one day. And we're very much looking forward to being the biggest player and make that happen together with the other developers. Also, I wanted to thank you, Belen, and the organizers for putting this together. I think it's a very good way to create awareness of what's happening and what's going on, and how Egypt now is really tapping into the massive potential of solar energy for nations in growth. Thank you.
No, thank you, guys. So thank you, Messi, our partners for the organization of this webinar, the Middle East Solar Industries Association. They have done a great work putting all of you together, and it is important that we discuss, these opportunities, and there is more transparency and information for everyone. But that is also thanks to you that you've been here sharing. So I appreciate all of your time, Morten, Mohammed, Christopher, and of course, Engineer Lamia. I know that we've run out of time, but just really quickly, Nishat sent a question across, and he said, I must have forgotten or I misplaced it somewhere. The question was, how do private commercial customers get finance for renewable energy projects? I don't know whether any of you has a really quick answer for that. before we just cut off?
Yeah, I can basically quickly just give an indication of how the project works, because I think that we've been talking about the project from our perspective, but most people are not really aware how these projects are financed and how they work. So I can give my insight into that, and then it's good that we have a lender here so they can also add more into that. So basically, so the projects are financed mostly through debt, and I would say usually 75-25, 80-20, mostly from debt, and the rest is coming from equity provided by the developers. So when we say achieving financial close, it means basically satisfying the lenders that well, the developers has met all the requirements, and that we can start using that debt in order to start construction and financing the project. So most of the projects are financed through debt. Portion of it is coming from equity. Equity is the capital that is brought by the developers themselves, and this also ensures that the projects follow international standards, and they are aligned with the international finance regulations. And also, given Egypt is right now a sub-investment country, so you might also, the lenders usually cover the risk with some institutions like MIGA, for example, which also add a layer on top of that to ensure that the best quality and the international standards are met in order to finance these projects. So maybe Christopher, you can shed more light on that.
Very short.
Yeah. Thanks, Mohammed. Yeah, I mean, generally, it's a very broad question, but you know, the first step is to have a conversation with your preferred lenders, of course. These transactions are usually fairly high profile. It depends on the size of the project. Small transactions, on an individual facility under a few megawatts, probably a local lender in a local market would be taken care of. But when you start getting to the utility scale, or even large commercial rooftops that have 5 or more megawatts, then you start attracting international lenders like IFC. I mean, the first place to start is obviously having a conversation, and then we can assess the bankability of the project that you want to develop. You need to have a strong credentials as an owner sponsor, ideally with a bit of experience in how to put them together. You need to be able to have the bankability, the financials to be able to certainly cover your own portion, but also to cover the costs if anything goes wrong. So I mean, there's quite a lot that goes into putting together a project finance transaction, and probably the best place to start, without going into a long lecture on what's involved, is just to start with a phone call to one of the lenders that have been working on these programs.
Thank you very much. Okay, so just some last words. Nessia, they have words. You can apply for the words. You can also vote. Please go to the website. And just one last chance to say thank you very much to all our panelists, Morten, Mohammed, Christopher, and also Engineer Lamia, who couldn't be here until the end of the Shahada 90 problem. She must have said the Shahada 90 problem. So thank you all very much, and also thank you for the audience for being there, and hopefully see you in the next one. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.